Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Fireside chat, as it was communicated. It's really a very exciting session for us today, where we're going to talk about and explore the subject of creating spaces for diversity, particularly as we focus on everything that Women's Month means to us. So a big welcome to all the participants today, and thank you for taking time out to join this panel discussion. A big welcome to our guests and panelists, to Bushle Madao and Carmel Maroc. We're really looking forward to hearing your inputs and stories. And we know that you have just so much to share, and there's so much for us to contemplate and learn. And a welcome to our BPESA panelists, to Francois and to Tracy Freeman, who are going to be joining the conversation as well. The purpose of today's session then, with our focus on Women's Month, is really to place our attention on the women in our sector. But we can expand on that and think more broadly than just the GBS sector, and to understand much better how we can unlock the rich contribution that they make to the development of the sector and to the contribution that our sector should make to our social and economic goals. And it's a broad-based conversation. The agenda to take us through that is going to start off with a little bit of a context set to the sector and what we are doing, what we are aspiring to do and achieve, and the significance of that, and then the role that women currently play in the sector. Then we're going to move quite quickly, though, into a panel discussion in which I'll be asking Carmel and Bushle a few questions, and they will then, in their own way, respond and go off script if they feel like it, and share their thoughts and views. But with each of the questions, we're wanting to try and get some takeouts that we as a collective, that's the men and women in this sector and in the leadership of the sector, can really take forward with us as actionable things to work on, and really transform this sector into one that embraces the full diversity of everybody that makes up this sector, and particularly the women that contribute to this fantastic sector. Then we're going to get to a section after the questions and answers, where we will be able to take your questions, which you'll be able to post on the chat line, and also at the end you can raise your hands. And I'm sure between Carmel, Bushle, Fran and Tracy, they'll be able to respond to those really well. We'll save a few minutes at the end, when I'd like to just go back to the panelists, including the BPESA team, for a few closing comments, and we'll wrap up at 1 p.m. So I hope that works for everybody from an agenda perspective. And I think let's get started with a little bit of context and background to our sector as we try and locate the discussion for today. So most of you are very familiar with this really exciting and dynamic sector. It's one of the few sectors in the South African economy that really offers great growth opportunity. And in that growth opportunity lies the opportunity to grow inclusively and provide access to that growth across the country, and to many types of role players, from small businesses to large, startup to mature, in the operational environment and the supply chain, young people to older people, men and women, and of all races, cultures, religions. And so we really can use this growth opportunity and potential that we have in South Africa in this sector to create an environment that is inclusive in the true sense of the word, and that can help transform our society and economy into the one that is what everybody really desires and seeks. So to scale it, there are more than 265,000 people working in this sector that we are aware of. And that's understated, because those are only based on the reports and the information that's shared with us. Of that, 65,000 of those people service offshore markets, mainly in the UK, Australia and the USA, and Canada, but also increasingly in Asia and in the rest of Africa. And 200,000 work in the domestic market. And when we look at the makeup of that workforce, and it's a large workforce by any standards, 65% of that workforce is made up of women at all levels of work, from executive level leadership roles to entry level roles. And that's obviously the majority, and just goes to demonstrate the extent to which this sector is driven by and influenced by women. So it's really significant for us when we talk today and engage the panelists about their views and their experiences, that we are able to take forward their recommendations or their comments and their suggestions and share those with others, absorb those ourselves, and act on them as we try and make this environment a better environment, a more fulfilling environment, a safer environment, an environment that's better understood, and importantly, an environment that really creates the conditions to realize the full potential of everybody, but for today's conversation, specifically the women that make up the majority of the sector. We have huge aspirations for growth. Collectively, we've set targets to add an additional 100,000 jobs by the end of 2023, and an extremely bold and audacious goal of adding 500,000 jobs by the end of 2030. And in that way, if we are successful, we will really make a meaningful and impactful contribution to job creation, to transformation, and to the economic and social well-being of the sector and the country. So with that context, I'd like to welcome Carmel and Bushle, and I'd like to kick off with a question to each of you. But before you answer the question, I'd like you each just to give a very short introduction to yourselves, and then answer the question, and we will get into a dialogue around that. So let me begin then, and I'm going to ask Bushle to introduce yourself to the audience, please. Over to you, Bushle.
Thank you so much, Andy, and good afternoon, colleagues in the GPS space. Yeah, it's such an honor to be part of the panel. I mean, when I got the invite, I thought, wow, is this really happening? But I'm grateful to be given opportunities, especially in times like this, to be given a platform and opportunity to be able to say or to almost air my views on, particularly in this sector. So just a quick, I think, overview about myself, where I come from, family. So I do come from a family of 4 girls. Well, my mom was a domestic worker, and my father was he used to work in factories. Originally, my family, we come from, my dad's from Swaziland, and my mom is actually from Zim. So I was just telling Fran earlier that I'm actually a proper foreigner in SA. At the moment, I am, for now, I am married with 2 kids, and you know, I fell in love with Gauteng and I never left. So yeah, I've been here ever since. In terms of my career, I started my career with Quest a couple of years back. After a year, obviously, I signed a contract with merchants as a quality assessor. And I think in this space, I've enjoyed, I think, the positions that I've occupied. When I started with merchants many years ago, I did a couple of roles within merchants. I always tell people that every time, you know, people talk about merchants, well, I view it as a sort of university for most of us in the BPO space, because a lot of us started at merchants and then we grew into other spaces or other entities. So I did a bit of workforce within merchants. I did quality assessment, operational management, right until the senior operations role. And then post that, obviously, I moved on to another company. After that, I've been obviously occupying a couple of senior roles in the GBS space. So I've been head of operations, head of customer service, client relationship management, and I've worked for a couple of big BPO players in the space. I worked for merchants, as I said. I worked for WNS. I worked for Bytes People Solutions. I worked for Interactive. So yeah, I've had a very lengthy sort of journey in the space. I'm currently doing a dual role, or fulfilling a dual role. I am the managing director of Elevate Group, which is a new player in the GPS sector, with the main focus on township economy. So we predominantly focused on building call centers in the township and providing opportunities there. I also fulfill a role within Call Force, so I am an operations lead for Call Force, particularly for their domestic accounts. So I think in a nutshell, that's a summary view of who Buhle is, where Buhle comes from, and what I'm currently doing. Thanks, Andy.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Buhle. And I don't want to let you go just yet. I want you to also please tell us a little bit about your vision for yourself, your plan for the future. Share a little bit about the lessons you've learned on this journey that you've been from your first job to where you are now with your own business, playing a very senior role as well in Call Force. And then what you would share with others on this call, and a message that they can share with their colleagues back in the office or at home, wanting to achieve similar success.
So I think, well, I'll start with the lessons I think I've learned, I think in my journey, you know, starting your own business. So as I've said, as much as I've occupied a couple of positions or a few positions in the BPO space, I still felt underutilized, and I still felt as if I'm still not part of the boardroom conversations, you know. And my vision was really, what I wanted to achieve was coming from a township background and obviously seeing the life and experience within the township space. I really wanted to make a difference in the township, and I believe that the BPO space is actually a better position to be able to make that impact in this space. So my vision really, Andy, was really around that, to make an impact in the township, to make a meaningful difference in the township, to basically convert the township into an economic hub, to be able to drive the accountability in the township, to start making my neighbors or my before neighbors in the township to see a township as a place of opportunity. So this was really my vision in obviously pursuing my opening the company. I wanted to see that. And in terms of lessons learned, I think I'll share a bit later as well, but there's a lot of lessons that I've learned. I've had to firstly adapt to moving from being an employee to be an employer. There's a lot of lessons, I think, particularly internal, that I had to learn about myself in this space. I had to learn to be okay with a lot of no's in this space, because now I had moved from being an employee where you are comfortable, you've got your salary, you know, everything is fine, and someone is getting business and you're just making the business work, to being someone that now needs to go and get business, you know, and make your business work and ensure that you remain relevant, you know. So I think in terms of that was my learning as well, to know that it's the no's are as good as the yeses. As well as to understand, I think as part of my journey, to understand that not every opportunity is actually a good opportunity for you. You know, some opportunities will really cost you your peace, your integrity, particularly as a woman in this space, you know. So at times it's okay to say no and be okay with who you are and be at peace with who you are. So those are some of the learnings, I think, in my journey.
Thanks, Bruce, for sharing that with us. That's really, really insightful. And I'm going to go to you, Carmel. And you've had a long and checkered career, starting as a student activist and now playing a key integrator role between social partners across all sectors of the economy as a program lead in the Job Summit. Please tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, your background, and what has motivated you as a woman to take the path that you have.
So hi, and it's great to be here. And I'm struggling a little bit with imposter syndrome, which I understand is appropriate given I'm a woman speaking on the complexities of gender. But I'm of course not from the sector, although I work a lot with the sector as part of my work in the Presidential Job Summit. So it's great to be with you all. And it is a sector that is, I mean, Andy talked about it in the introduction, but in the context of an economy that's in crisis, it is the one sector where we're saying, okay, we can still see that there are opportunities, that the sector has been adaptive and made changes to be able to absorb new entrants. So it's really nice to be here, but a little intimidating. So I grew up in Cape Town, and I say I'm very much still a Cape Townian, although some of my Cape Town friends tell me I'm a little bit more Joburg than I think. And I don't think that's a good thing, but what can you do? I've lived half my life in Johannesburg and half my life in Cape Town. And I grew up in a family where from the age of 7, I think I joined the youth sector and has been involved in youth organizations pretty much since then. And I was reflecting on it recently when we were talking about roles for leadership, because in a sense, from the age of 7, I got involved in youth organizations. By 12, I was already running youth groups and doing different things as part of the Jewish youth movement. And I think it's an enormously privileged background. And then I did get involved at school in anti-apartheid organizational work, and then again, still at university, and in particular in the National Education Crisis Committee. And I think it was a difficult time, but also very privileged, because it gave an opportunity to play a leadership role in different kinds of ways, in different sectors, working across universities, across communities, where we had to find different ways of connecting with people. And that's really is an amazing thing to be able to do, whether it's working in Mitchell's Plain and swapping Mills and Boon books, or finding different ways that people are operating in the world and connecting. So that was kind of growing up. And I joined the National Youth Development Forum when I was still in Cape Town, and became very involved in National Youth Service work. And that's in essence what took me to Johannesburg, where I then continued with youth work, but also became much more involved in the unions initially, and then became more involved in what currently, I guess what I'd locate myself in now, which is the kind of nexus between policy, research, and evaluation, particularly focusing on skills, employment, and gender. And so in part, one of the reasons I think my role in the Presidential Job Summit was possible is because as part of that role, then I've worked in the community, with community structures, with unions, with government, and with business, which has allowed me to work across those sectors, which is where I'm currently at. And then also partly, and this is where we're seeing particular sector as particularly useful as part of the work that the President's doing around supporting the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention. So which is where I currently find myself.
Carmel, thank you. And I'm going to come back a little bit later to the work that you're doing with the Presidential Job Summit. You know, you probably are understating a lot of your skills and competencies in being able to weave your magic and work your magic in a very complex and difficult environment amongst all those stakeholders with the conflicting interests and challenges that we've got, and the really strong goals that we've set for ourselves and have to achieve just to create the future that's so important for South Africa. So we're going to come back and talk more about that. But let me go back to you, Bushle. You know, you've taken the leap to set up your own business. You talked a little bit about that earlier on. We talk a lot about the importance of entrepreneurship in South Africa, and we appreciate its significance in the development of the economy and the creation of jobs, and a whole host of factors, and our competitiveness, our productivity, and many other things. But that leap is no doubt not as easy as it sounds. And so it would be really good to hear from you just how easy or difficult you found that transition. And I think if you can also just share with everybody what motivated you to start up your own business. You've told us about the drive to really take work to the township, unlock the opportunity, but through your own business, if you can share more about that. And then importantly, what message is there to other women who, like you, can really make a difference in South Africa through your own business as a vehicle? So over to you, Bushle.
Thanks, Andy. So I think for me, Andy, as I said, I think as much as I've occupied, you know, the senior roles, a lot of senior roles in this sector, obviously feeling underutilized, not being part of the strategic conversations that drive the organization. So I think particularly as a woman, I knew I was there in the BPO space, but you're almost not sure if you matter. It's almost as if you feel invisible. So you are there, but you feel invisible. So I was in that space when I moved, or I took that leap of faith of opening my own business, because it was more of, I want to be heard. I know I've got something to contribute in this space, etc. And then obviously I took a decision and I moved towards that. And then I think for me, the contribution and the strategic direction I wanted to take, particularly in this sector, obviously aligned with my vision in terms of contributing to the sector, was one thing that drove me. And I knew from then onwards that I needed to start my own business in order for me to make a difference in this space. But I have to say that starting or taking that leap of faith has not been easy. It's been very difficult, particularly if you do not come from a background, almost like sort of a privileged background, where you've had people who can mentor you from a business point of view, where you are exposed to business and how business operates, you know. You're almost going into this sector with sort of a blindfold, you know, just trusting the process, trusting that things will work out. And unfortunately, business is not like that. But I must say that through all the hardships, through all the pushing, through all the crying, the tears, I'm truly grateful to, and I'm not saying this because I think Andy and Tracy and Fran are on the call, but I'm truly grateful to BPESA, because through all of that and talking to different organizations, talking to different people, when I shared my vision with BPESA, I mean, the first person I shared it with was Evan Jones, who said, you've got something valid that you're talking about. Let's see what we can do about that. And, you know, for the first time, I felt as if someone heard what I was trying to say, you know. And BPESA listened and were more prepared to walk with me throughout this journey. And they're still walking with me in this journey. There's still a lot that I am learning. I am still becoming, so I've not yet arrived. I know that, because there's a lot of things I'm learning on a daily basis. This for me it's just the beginning, what I've achieved. So I think when I started feeling as if I matter, you know, when you start feeling as if you're what we are saying makes a difference, it almost pushes you to do more in that space. You see opportunities that you didn't even know that the opportunities existed, you know. So I think for me, I always go back to that day when I sat with Andy and Tracy, and I shared my vision, and they actually sat back and said, what you are saying makes sense, a lot of sense, you know. After years of feeling as if what I'm saying did not make sense. And on top of that, I had someone to handhold me, you know, through the process, because I didn't have, you know, I didn't grow up with all the privilege. I mean, I was also, I think, a bit intimidated by people in the industry, you know, intimidated by the fact that I didn't think my English was good enough. I didn't think I was good enough to even be in the positions that I was in. You know, I knew I could deliver. I knew I was capable of, I mean, changing an operation to run like a well-oiled machine. I know I'm capable of that, but there was still that thing, and I think it's a cultural thing, particularly for women, where you're still not feeling you're good enough, even if you're delivering, you know. So for me, I think that's been my journey in this space. And if I had to have a message, I think particularly for women who want to do business, is that I think one thing that's important is that you are good enough and your vision matters, you know. You might have to talk to 20 people before someone says to you, yes, what you're saying is valid and what you're saying matters. And I think as well, probably the second thing I would say is that you need to get used to a lot of no's than yeses, you know. I know that when I started my career, or when I started the business Elevate Group, there were a lot of no's, and I didn't know how to deal with the no's, you know. I had to look in the industry and try to find someone that's going to help me get off the PT party that I was, you know, almost going through at the time, you know. But fortunately, as I said, you know, Evan was very helpful, I think, in building my character, particularly from a business point of view. So you have to be okay with a lot of no's and a few yes. So that would be my message. And yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've learned, I think I said this earlier, is that it's not every opportunity. And I think for me, particularly as a woman, that's been a big learning, you know, in this space, you know, because you talk to CEOs, you talk to people who are used to making decisions, people who are used to being heard, you know. And as a woman in this space, firstly, they're not used to a woman walking into a boardroom and telling them, I own a BPO company, this is what I'm doing sales, I'm doing service, these are my clients that I'm servicing at the moment. They're not used to that, you know. And at times, the things that may look like they're opportunities, you know, whilst they're actually not opportunities, you know, some of the things will really compromise your integrity. So it is okay to say, you know what, I'll pass, you know, this is not yet my time is coming. So I think for me, Andy, that's been my biggest learning and my message, particularly to women, that you are good enough. Your opinion or your vision matters, you know. And what you say is as good as what your male counterpart is going to say, you know. You can Google, like all of them Google, you know. You can use Zoom, you can use Google Meets, you know. So what you know is valid, and what you believe in is also valid. So for me, it had to be a lesson that I learned on my own, and reaching out to mentors in the industry has actually helped me to get where I am today.
Thank you, Bushle, for sharing that. And you probably really understate the confident way in which you come across as an entrepreneur and as a business leader. And I'm sure that there's so much that you have to teach others with and to share that many can benefit from in following a path similar to yours. Carmel, we live in very challenging times, and you talked about it earlier, and we're all acutely aware of that. your recent work on the Job Summit is crucial to how we deal with these challenges and shape a better society for our long-term future. I want to get a little bit technical now because we have the privilege of having access to you on this call, and want to ask you to please share a little bit about the Job Summit and the other related economic recovery and growth initiatives that you are interconnected with and coordinating through, like the PPGI, Business BPESA, the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative, and for you to share your perspective of the importance of that work and your role for South Africa.
So, I mean, I think it is a really difficult time. And one of the complexities or tensions of the time, and where this sector is completely critical, is that the work of the Job Summit, when partners first came together to make commitments in October 2018, was very much focusing on how do we create more jobs. That there was a recognition that there were new entrants entering the economy every year that couldn't be absorbed, and that we needed to look at how you are supporting sectors that can grow to enable new entrants to have opportunities. And there was a recognition that we also needed to preserve jobs, but it was very much focused on creating jobs. We now sit just under 2 years later, and in real terms, we haven't managed to create the kind of jobs we'd wanted. And in fact, your sector is pretty much the only one that exceeded its targets. But we are also sitting in the crisis that it's now of equal concern to create jobs as it is to protect the jobs we already have. And so it's meant that there's a recognition across social partners that we need to broaden the strategy and say, well, what is in particular government putting in to ensure that we're able to both support the industries that do exist, as well as create public employment. And so in that context, some of the commitments of the Job Summits have been maintained, but are being located now within a broader economic recovery plan. And a lot of that is being championed by government across director generals, across ministers, to say, what is it that the state needs to do quite urgently if we're going to be able to maintain at least as many jobs as we can, whilst also creating new jobs. And so there's a broad agreement around an economic recovery plan. I think many of the commitments, including the ones for creating jobs, have been maintained, but there's a much stronger focus on, I'd say, 3 areas. The one is, and this is of particular relevance perhaps for this sector, is the digital economy. And how are we moving much faster than we have been, and we have been extremely slow in relation to digitalizing the state and looking at what are the opportunities. How are we supporting it in relation to ensuring that there's a much faster move from analog to digital? We know that that's been unlocked to some extent because of COVID. We need to make sure that that doesn't go backwards, and in fact that there's expanded access, and that we're also creating jobs through the way that we roll it out. And then also, how do we ensure that some of the infrastructure commitments that have been on the table for quite a long time actually become bankable, that there's possibilities for blended finance, and that those infrastructure projects can roll out so that they can create jobs. And that's a big imperative. And that's very closely linked to the other area of work that we're focusing on, which is being directly driven by the presidency, which is the economic stimulus package, and then specifically the Presidential Youth Employment Intervention. And that, I'd say, has 2 different elements. And the one is, in particular, how do we create much more social employment at community levels? What's possible? Where are the areas where there is work, but there haven't been jobs? How do you create those jobs? How do you make sure that they're meaningful and that they're sustainable? And then how do they link in with social enterprises and other forms of enterprises? And there are already examples in your community where people have been able to, in quite innovative ways, start call centers in areas where traditionally there've been no jobs. But because of the way that technology's changed, how do we harness that? And I think there are some excellent examples in your sector around that. And then critically, how do we ensure that there are the kinds of skills that people need to access that? And in a sense, that has 2 pressures. And I guess my other hat and my closer to heart hat in some ways is the work that it's the skills sector and making sure that skills are able to deliver the kind of skills we need in our economy. And so a key area that I have been working in is very closely with the Ministry in Higher Education and Training to say, how do we ensure that the skills sector is able to meet the needs? And that has a number of different dimensions. I said 2, but I realize who I'm talking to, so maybe 3 is appropriate. The one is, how do we build stronger institutions? How do we make sure that the institutions we have can be responsive? Because if we have weak institutions, it doesn't matter what incentives we put in place, we can't provide the kind of skills people need. And the second is, how do we make sure that there's a funding mechanism that ensures that we can be responsive to the needs of the sector? And in fact, Andy has played a key role in helping us to define what's needed in that space. How do we ensure that the CETA money is used for programs that may or may not be accredited, but that is critical for employment and for new entrants to access the economy and for existing employees to progress in the examples that we've already started talking to in today's call. And then the third is, how do we recognize what's needed in terms of critical skills? And one of the areas of work that I had been doing as part of the Job Summit is, how do you make sure that there's space for people with critical skills where we need visas to access opportunities? And again, your sector's been quite pioneering, let's use that word, for helping us to test the systems and what we need from the Department of Home Affairs. That some of the challenges, I think, sometimes with government systems is that they haven't necessarily been built with industry and with an understanding of how industry works. And some of it is about, how do you create the conversation between partners so that the systems are better able to meet those needs? And I think those are some of the areas of priority and work that's been done, but why it is so important that industry associations and the kind of work that BPESA has been doing, why it's so important that that role is played, because it means that there's partners to work together and look at what is needed and what is possible. And some of it is very slow and some of it is very frustrating. And any of you who have been through some of those processes will be nodding your heads that it is pretty frustrating, but it actually requires that partnership to say, okay, this is what would work. This is what makes it possible to have a longer term sustainable system and meet immediate needs, and how we can do it in ways that both protect jobs as well as create jobs. So Andy, I don't know if there's specific questions you'd want to ask, but that would be a general sense of where we're heading as priorities and some of the challenges.
Thanks, Carmel. No, I wish the listeners on this session had an insight, even just a slightly similar insight to what I've had to what it takes in terms of those partnerships. When I see how you worked with the different role players to unblock obstacles, to get things done, the persistence, the patience, the negotiating, you know, the bringing people along, etc. It really is quite something. Carmel, thanks very much. I'm going to come back to you just now for one last question in closing. But before doing that, Bushley, I want to just ask you your view on how you feel that we as men and women leaders are equipped. Do you feel that we're suitably equipped to embrace the full potential of women and the development of our society and our economy? And as a takeout for everybody, what would be the 3 most important messages be that you'd like to share with today's audience about creating spaces for diversity, particularly for women?
Thanks, Andy. So I think in my view, I think, yes, just to answer your question, yes, I think we all have an opportunity, I think, to embrace each other's potential, both men and women, you know. I think if there's one thing that you learn, I think, over the years about this space is that you all have a role to play. As little as you might think or underestimate what you do on a daily basis, in the bigger scheme of things, it actually makes a huge difference in someone's life. And I think that's important to remember on a daily basis. And just, I think, for me, the most important thing in terms of this industry, a message that I would like to share with the audience, is that I think we do need to start seeing each other as equal partners with the same potential of growing their space and having a meaningful contribution in our sector. So both male and female in this space, we are equal partners in this, and we both need to make the sector work. I honestly believe that I think BPO is one of the sector, I don't think there's a career or a career path sort of in this space that I've seen or witnessed which is able to almost take a person that's from matric and convert that person to be a CEO, over time, with patience and learning and the process. So I think we are privileged, one, to be part of the sector. And I think we have an opportunity, to create a very diverse, a very informed workforce, a very involved workforce, and a very multi-skilled workforce. I mean, in BPO sector, it's one of the few sectors where you can literally multi-skill a person to do a number of things. I think I mentioned earlier that I think starting my career, yes, I started a bit, but I did workforce, I did quality, I did junior management, senior management, and it is through the sector that I was able to be multi-skilled and be able to do what I'm doing today. So we need to start seeing each other's contributions as important and valid. I think as well, the second point would be, I think for me, the empowerment of women is a necessity, particularly in our sector, for the very development of any society. I think since women, we all know that I think women are basically primary caretakers of children and elders in every country in the world. Therefore, women would play a critical part in helping adjust to our new reality and challenges. I mean, Camille, I think, alluded to the changes that you find ourselves having to adapt to, I mean, COVID has made us adapt to our new reality, our new normal, and I think women are a critical part in society to help society to adjust to those new reality and challenges. So we need to invest and we need to do it. We need to be intentional about doing that, invest in empowerment and empowering women, invest in ensuring that women are in critical, influential positions, position of power, position of making decisions. They're given spaces where they're able to articulate their vision, they're able to articulate and they're able to help the broader society, adjust to its new reality. And I think my third point would be, I think for me, development of women, it's critical in that obviously women are, I think, are naturous, are born naturous, if I might put it that way. And if we can start investing, intentionally, being intentional about investing in women's development in executive positions, not just middle management positions, but executive position of influence, I really and truly believe that will start to shape how even these young men, particularly view the role of a woman in a greater society. You will start to shape how a young man starts seeing their sister as their counterpart, as opposed to their helper when daddy's business has grown. So I think for me, Andy, those three aspects are critical in us as a sector achieving, the full potential of what we can actually do. So for me, those are the critical three.
Thank you, Bushler. Really, really fascinating inputs and a lot for us to take forward. Carmel, just as part of closing, because I'd like to just get to my BPESA colleagues and there's some questions I've seen on the Q&A and the chat line, but I don't want to let the opportunity go in talking to you about the research that your company has conducted with Harambee. into improving gender outcomes for young women. And I know this is a subject that could take, a long time to talk through, but if you can, would you share the 3 most important takeouts of that report that you feel we as leaders in this sector and generally as responsible citizens should understand and do something about as we move forward to build this more equal and inclusive society that we aspire to?
Sure. Thanks, Andy. So I was trying to think, oh my gosh, the 3. So that's tricky, but let me try. So I think the first thing that
limited to 3, sure.
No, it's probably good practice, but I think the one thing that we absolutely found with the research, and it was really interesting doing the research and looking at, in particular with the Harambee network, to look at what are the ways that young women in that network have been able to access employment. And what's interesting to note in terms of the Harambee network is more than half of the people in the network are young women, which is important because certainly what we're finding in all of the research is that young women are much less able to utilize their networks to access opportunities. So Harambee is seen as really important in that context. And I think the one thing we found, and maybe this is a key thing and it relates to what Buhle was talking to in her own experience, is what's so important is when people are using that networks is that young women often don't have the kind of confidence that they need to access the networks or to say, this is what I can do, this is what I'm about. And so what's really critical in that context is to have role models that young women can work with, other women of color who are able to model what's possible in terms of working in the sector and to create the kind of confidence. So I think that that's a key learning from this, is the importance of that and modeling different behaviors. I think the second is that what we're absolutely finding is that young women have a much more difficult time work seeking than young men. So although that is universally true that young people who are from disadvantaged backgrounds, from disadvantaged communities struggle more, that is even more so for young women. And it relates to things that often we take for granted. So for example, for young women, when they describe the trip that they have to take and the way that they have to think about transport, safety is such a key feature. And so often the cost of transport is higher and their ability to access opportunities at different times is made much more difficult by the fact that there are safety considerations that are paramount in South Africa, unfortunately. And that even in the context of actually during interviews and then being new entrants, the level of sexual harassment that young women report is absolutely horrifying. So I think it's about how do companies make it possible for young women to apply for the kinds of opportunities that are there in ways that ensure that there's a safe environment and that people can speak with some confidence about their opportunities. So for me, that's the second one. And then thirdly, and I think this is a truism really, is that it's an extraordinary thing that even now, even in a society like South Africa, which for all its troubles has the most remarkable constitution, that we still see huge inequities in what young women earn than what men earn for the same jobs. And so I think it's about really reflecting on practices in companies and making sure that women are encouraged to take up the same opportunities and are rewarded equally for those opportunities and are able to progress. And I think in your sector, and Buhle is obviously, as I say, a key example of it, but I think we've been able to, over the years of evaluating Harambee, document many examples of young women really being given the space to play team leader role, to take over the leadership role and progress in sectors. And I think that that's an absolutely key part of transforming our companies and ultimately our economy in more inclusive ways. So I'd say those are my 3. I think that was a sneaky 3 because, of course, some of them have sub-points, but they're a broad 3.
Fantastic, Carmel. So we've got 6 really rich points that you both shared with us to work with and to take out from today's session. And they really, I think, give us a lot to work on and think about as we embrace the opportunity the sector presents to make for a more inclusive environment, and one that really taps into the value of the incredible women in our world and in this sector. I'm very privileged to work with so many, and they are fantastic. They are tremendous leaders, tremendous people to work with, and there are many of them on this call. And so it's just something that, I believe passionately in as well, and feel that as males in our society, our biggest weakness will be underestimating and limiting the value that the women in our lives are able to offer. And it's incumbent on us to find out how best do we do that and create the environment to support that. I want to, before we close, just turn to my BPESA colleagues, to Fran and Tracy, and just ask you, as the women leaders that you are, who haven't had an opportunity to talk at all on this call yet, just to share one message each with the audience that for you is the most important and relevant message for Women's Month. And can I start with you, Fran, and then end with you, Tracy?
Thanks, Andy. I think that the importance of women in our industry is that without us even targeting it, and long before it became something that was measured, was that women in the GBS BPO call center space have always done extremely well and have always flourished. I think the points that both Buhle and Carmel pointed out, the challenges that women in our industry face, the unsociable hours that one works, the shift work. And I think it's important that we all take cognizance of this in dealing with especially young women in our space. You've mentioned that you are blessed to work with us. I think we as women in the industry are very, very blessed to work with someone like yourself who embraces the skills and the passion that we bring to this industry. And I just think it's wonderful in this August month, Women's Month, that we be able to have two such powerful women talk to our industry, and really just want to say a huge thank you to both Buhle and Carmel. If anyone was intimidated before the call, I'm the one that's walking away incredibly intimidated. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. Trace, over to you.
Fran, thanks so much. Tracy, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Andy. And to echo Fran's thanks to Buhle and to Carmel for joining us today. It's always wonderful to listen to and hear stories of individuals, where you started and how you've gotten to where you are. Andy, I would say that my biggest message to anyone, male or female, in our sector and outside of our sector, is hold on to your truth, stay true to yourself, and always put kindness first, because everyone's going through some journey or the other. And it's amazing, and I think Buhle sort of alluded to this, how we as a community can actually support one another. And it's in that collective kindness and that collective support that we can actually grow and make our sector into the sector that I know that it can be. And it'll literally help shift the South African economy and South Africa as a whole. So I believe that with us working together, that we can achieve that. But it's really giving females a space to stand up and actually do what they're good at doing, and that's to help create. So thank you very much for everyone's participation today.
Wonderful, thank you, Tracy. And in the few minutes that we have, I just want to quickly go to the Q&A. The second question says, Buhle, many of our young people are not clear about career pathways in the BPO sector. Is there a way to communicate this at scale? I think your story has been an eye-opener for me. Buhle, can I ask you just to comment quickly on that with the time we have? And there's one more question I'd like to answer.
I am trying to.
You are unmuted, Buhle.
Am I?
Yes.
Apologies. Apologies, I'm busy pressing. Yeah, so just a quick comment. Look, I think for me, Nomfundo, it is really about just on a daily basis, each and every one of us, we've got a responsibility in this sector. You know, I think the government, BPESA, private sector, everyone is working on a daily basis to obviously try and move this forward. But I think we must never underestimate what we're doing on a daily basis. The little that you're doing, the 2 people that you're talking about, it's still an increase from yesterday. So I think it's a daily, it's almost reiterating on a daily basis, but I think it is going to be an ongoing thing, and it's just continuing to almost drive the same message over and over again. But all of us have a role to play in this space, and I think whatever we do on a daily basis obviously talks to the bigger picture. So for me, it's just continuing to drive that on a daily basis as an individual.
Thank you, Bushle. Nomfundo, you also asked a question about how the growth opportunity has expanded into the townships and enabled in the townships. It's a longer answer than we have time, and I'm going to ask that you connect with Fran and Tracy offline after this call and Bushle, and that collectively we can share what we're actually doing about it. There are some initiatives that I'm sure you would find interesting. So thank you very much for your question. And we are about to wrap. So what I would like to do, first of all, on behalf of all the participants and the panelists from BPESA, is just extend a huge thank you to you, Carmel, and to you, Bushle, for giving up your time to share what you have with us this afternoon, to inspire us as you've done and always do. And really, we just want to thank you and wish you well. And if I may ask you, if there's any comment you'd like to make in closing, a very short one, Carmel, over to you, and then Bushle to you, and we'll close the session.
Gosh, no, thanks. I mean, just to say that, well, thank you for inviting us, and thank you for being such a great partner. I think that if we're talking about gender and we're talking about different ways of working, then critical to that is how to be collaborative. And I think that your sector is really showing the way about how to be a collaborative partner and how to test things and how to make things happen. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, I think.
Thank you, Carmel. Bushle?
Yeah, I think, Andy, in closing, I think I'll echo Kamal's sentiments. So thank you very much for the invite. Thank you for the opportunity. And yes, for me, it is a collaborative effort. Each person has got a role to play, and don't underestimate what you're doing on a daily basis. The little what you're doing, it's making in the bigger scheme of things, it's making an impact.
Bushle, thank you very much. Well, thanks, Fran, Tracy, and everybody who's participated for joining us for the Creating Spaces for Diversity discussion. We really appreciate your time and the insightful conversations that we've had with Bushle and Carmel. That's recorded, and I'm sure you'll all receive a copy of that recording. But most importantly, let's take forward what we've heard and learned about today and continue to get better at collaborating together and really build the sector to realize its full potential. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great afternoon.